All right. Thank you so much, Stephanie. And thank you for DSI too for inviting me here this evening. As Stephanie mentioned, my name is Sarah Geis. I'm the Senior Director of Engagement for the ARC Master Trust. And I am here today to talk about sort of the initial basics about special needs trusts. And I'm just going to say this as a disclaimer for the recording. This information is current as of September 2023. So I am going to share my screen and get started. For folks who are joining us, I would say that if you do find that you have questions that are coming to you during the presentation, feel welcome to put those in the chat and I will get to them at the end, or you can hold on to them until the end of the webinar. And that helps me out a lot. So thank you for that in advance. All right. And is everyone able to see the recording or see the screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, so just like I had mentioned, we are going to be going over some of the basics about special needs trusts, and specifically the two types of special needs trusts that can be established for individuals: third-party special needs trusts and first-party special needs trusts, and the ways in which those trusts can be established. I always like prefacing my presentations by saying the ARC Master Trust is a department of a larger organization called the ARC of Indiana. And the ARC of Indiana is a statewide disability advocacy organization that was founded in 1956 by parents of children with intellectual and developmental disabilities to advocate for a better life for their children and every Hoosier going forward. Today, we are one of the leading advocacy organizations for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and their families. We are committed to progressive legislation and public policy, and we are affiliated with the ARC of the United States in Washington, D.C. We also have a number of local ARC chapters throughout the state of Indiana. So we're always here as an additional resource to answer any questions that you might have regarding navigating this state as a person with disabilities. So first things first, why would someone need a special needs trust? Well, some of you who are on the webinar or some of you watching this might be familiar with the various government benefits that do have what we call resource limits. You might also see that referred to as an asset limit. When we say resource limits or asset limits, we're talking about the same thing. And more specifically, we're talking about means-tested benefits. So when we're looking at the world of government benefits, we can put those benefits into two different parties. There's one party that is called entitlement benefits. So these are government benefits that you or I or others are entitled to as a part of working and our taxes going towards paying for those programs. Those are things like Social Security retirement, Social Security disability insurance, or Medicare. In the other parties, we have what are called means-tested benefits. And these are the government benefits where, in addition to meeting a level of disability eligibility to receive those benefits, there is a financial eligibility component to those. So two of the most common means-tested benefits are SSI, which stands for Supplemental Security Income, and Medicaid. Both SSI and Medicaid have resource limits. Currently, the monthly resource limit for these benefits is $2,000. So what I mean by that is on the first of each month, Medicaid and SSI want to see that your total countable assets are below $2,000. And it's important throughout this webinar to mention that what I'm talking about specifically is assets. This is different from income, so how much you have, which is different than how much you make. There are income limits for certain benefits, but specifically a special needs trust is helping someone shield their financial assets. So the funds that are in a special needs trust are not counted as a resource towards that resource limit. So when we look at special needs trusts, again, they are there to allow someone the ability to save money, save for their future, keep their financial assets in a way that is protecting their eligibility for those means-tested government benefits like SSI or Medicaid. Special needs trusts also provide loved ones such as parents or grandparents or other individuals who want to be able to provide their own financial resources to an individual who either might be receiving those means-tested government benefits already, or as a way to safeguard their future should they need to become eligible for means-tested government benefits. Throughout this presentation, I am going to be referencing the various rules and regulations that special needs trusts need to follow in order to ensure that the special needs trust itself does not count towards somebody's asset limits. These rules are set forth by government agencies like Social Security when we're looking at SSI and Medicaid. But the biggest one, and the one that I find to be one of the more important rules that a special needs trust needs to follow is this one. The special needs trust is for the primary and sole benefit of that individual for whom the trust is established. They are usually defined, or we usually call that person the beneficiary. And the special needs trust needs to be managed by an individual who is referred to as the trustee. So managed for the primary and sole benefit of the beneficiary by a trustee. So a trustee is the person who is responsible for administering the funds within a special needs trust. The trustee can be an individual, like a parent or sibling or other trusted family member or individual in that beneficiary's life. Or it could be a professional, such as a organization like a bank, or a professional like an attorney. You can also have a nonprofit organization administer a special needs trust. So the Arc of Indiana and the Arc Master Trust do manage the trusts that we administer. So we are considered the trustee for the trusts that we oversee. And a trustee is responsible for the administration and record keeping of the special needs trust. So this includes various responsibilities like working with the beneficiary to determine what needs or wants the beneficiary wants the trust to pay for, and figuring out the ways in which those payments can happen. And sometimes those payments are referred to as a disbursement. The trustee is responsible for fiscal oversight, administering the trust in a way that will not impact the beneficiary's benefits, and following the rules set forth by government agencies. Maintaining records and receipts for all disbursements made out of the trust, reporting expenditures, so how the trust is used, to various government agencies to resolve any issues or concerns, or to ensure that the beneficiary is compliant and still eligible for their benefits. And the trustee is also responsible for filing taxes and providing tax documentation to the beneficiary. So it is important when you're considering establishing a special needs trust that the trustee who's going to be overseeing that for your loved one or for yourself, that they are familiar and aware with all of the responsibilities that will be coming their way. So are there different kinds of special needs trusts? So yes, there are options in the types of special needs trusts that can be established for a beneficiary. And those vary by the funding source. So where is the money coming from that's going into the trust, and the administration. So how is the trust being administered, or who is administering that trust? So there are two types of special needs trusts. The one that I usually talk about first is called a third party special needs trust. So this is a type of special needs trust that contains the assets of somebody else for the benefit of that person. So it's, could be a parent or grandparent who wants to include that trust as a part of their will or estate planning for the benefit of their child or grandchild. It could also be a sibling providing for a sibling, or a friend providing for a friend. Usually when we're talking about third-party trusts, we tend to assume that there's a familial relationship. There does not need to be one. It's not required, but typically there is a familial relation, which is why we speak about third-party trusts in that way most often. The individual who is setting up the third-party trust, who plans to donate into that trust for the benefit of the beneficiary, is typically referred to as the donor. So throughout this, you might hear me use that word, and that's who I am referring to. So at the ARC Master Trust, we do administer a third-party trust, and we call that our Trust 1 account. We call it Trust 1 because this was the first type of special needs trust that we began to administer back in 1988. There's also another type of special needs trust, and this is called a first party. Sometimes it's also referred to as a self-settled special needs trust. And this contains the financial assets or resources of the beneficiary. So this is a situation in which the beneficiary might be over-resourced with their own Social Security funds, their wages. They might have received a lawsuit settlement, or could be the direct beneficiary of an inheritance. That money is considered their own financial asset. So they might be setting up a first-party special needs trust to shield those assets and maintain their benefit eligibility. At the ARC Master Trust, we call this our Trust 2 accounts. It is incredibly important that the assets that are going into the trusts go into the appropriate ones. This is incredibly important, and I'll talk about one of the reasons why in another slide, but third-party assets cannot go into a first-party trust, and the same thing and vice versa. First-party assets cannot go into a third-party trust. So if I am a parent and I wanted to leave funds from a life insurance policy to my child, I could do that via a third-party trust if I'm naming the trust directly. If I wanted the funds to go to my loved one directly, I would have to name them directly. But if I set up a third-party trust and I've not named the third-party trust of the beneficiary as a part of my estate, and it goes directly to my child is not able to establish a third-party trust with those assets. Their only option would be to establish a first-party trust. So who can establish a special needs trust? So in the world of a third-party trust, anyone who is not the intended beneficiary can be the donor. So it can be mom, dad, parent, grandparent, sibling, family members, friends, or any combination of the above can establish a third-party trust if they are intending their assets to go into that. In a first-party trust, there is a list of individuals who are authorized to establish that first-party trust for the benefit of the beneficiary. First and foremost, the beneficiary can always establish their own special needs trust. So they're always welcome to establish that themselves. A parent or grandparent of the beneficiary can also establish a special needs trust for them. And this might be in a situation in which that beneficiary needs assistance in filling out those forms and understanding what those documents are, and getting the trust established. If a beneficiary has a guardian or a power of attorney, they can also establish a first-party trust for the benefit of the beneficiary. A question I sometimes get with individuals who are exploring a first-party special needs trust is, can someone who is designated as a representative payee and be the person to establish that first-party trust? So if that person is just the representative payee, they are not able to establish that special needs trust. So Social Security and Medicaid do not allow at this time a representative payee to establish a first-party trust for the benefit of that beneficiary. However, a representative payee can work with the beneficiary, the parent, the grandparent, or the guardian to get that established. And what that might look like is, let's say that the representative payee of an individual is noticing that they are nearing that $2,000 asset limit, and they've talked with that beneficiary or that parent or guardian, and has recommended, hey, I think establishing a first-party trust would be really beneficial for this individual. And everyone is in agreement that they want to move forward with that. Well, the beneficiary, parent, grandparent, or guardian can be the individual or individuals who fill out those forms or who establish that first-party trust. And then the representative payee can then pay into that first-party trust. So that is a way in which, the individual's team can all work together for the establishment of that sort of trust. It's also important to know that a beneficiary can have as many special needs trusts as necessary, and it can be a combination of both third-party and first-party trusts. So an individual can have more than one third-party trust established. They can also have more than one first-party trust established. The reason for that could vary based on the beneficiary situation or the situations that the loved ones in the realm of a third-party trust might be facing. But just to let you know, an individual can have as many special needs trusts as they might want or need. There is no limit. So who is eligible for a special needs trust? So when we're thinking about eligibility, we're talking about the beneficiary. So when is the intended beneficiary eligible for a special needs trust? So in the world of a third-party trust, the beneficiary must have or identify as someone with a disability or have a disability diagnosis through a medical professional, or be receiving government benefits like Social Security or Medicaid. So again, this is going back to, a third-party trust can be established sort of in advance under the idea that an individual might need to become eligible for benefits in the future, and a third party helps shield those assets to protect that future eligibility. Or the person could be eligible for those benefits now. Still, they're always eligible for that third-party trust. To be eligible for a first-party special needs trust, the individual needs to be eligible or receiving some form of Social Security benefit like SSI, SSDI, or retirement benefits. That is because the laws that govern third and first-party trusts are slightly different. First-party trusts do have the requirement of Social Security disability eligibility before that individual can establish that first-party trust. Is there a required balance for a special needs trust? So this is where it could depend based on how and where you are establishing that special needs trust. So at the ARC Master Trust, there is no required minimum. A trust account can be started with as little as the cost of the enrollment fee. So we have trusts that are as little as, an initial funding of $100. There's also no maximum required balance as well for an ARC Master Trust or a maximum balance. So we serve individuals of all dollar amounts. In the world of a private trust, and this is going to be a trust that you established through the aid of an attorney that's sometimes held in a bank with a private trustee. There could be a minimum or maximum balance depending on the requirements of that trustee or an organization. So if this is the route that you are considering pursuing, it would be important to ask if they do have a minimum or maximum balance limit for that special needs trust. This is sometimes the most frequent question I have folks ask me, so how can a special needs trust be used? So a special needs trust can be used in an incredibly wide variety of different things, and it's almost impossible to create an all-inclusive list. So everything that's on this page is the list of most common ways in which we see beneficiaries at the ARC Master Trust wanting to use their trust. And it can be used for things like furniture, clothing, basic personal needs, things for a home or an apartment, transportation costs, car insurance. We can pay for vehicles. Sometimes we have paid for homes, and a special needs trust can pay for a home. Tuition, electronics, medical expenses not covered by an individual's insurance. So it can pay for a lot of those basic necessities, and a special needs trust can also pay for a lot of the fun things in life. So hobbies, entertainment, travel, vacations. Those are things that we at the ARC Trust have been able to support for our beneficiaries, and that's absolutely something that a special needs trust can do. Again, though, it is important to remember that a special needs trust can only be used for that primary benefit of the beneficiary. So a great example of when we're talking about primary benefit is gifts for other people. So a special needs trust is not able to pay for gifts for others because that's not for the primary benefit of the beneficiary. But there are ways in which a special needs trust can work with the beneficiary to ensure that they do have funds to pay for gifts or to pay for presents for others. It's important to know that if someone is receiving Social Security or if they are earning wages, that Social Security income, those wages are not required to be deposited into a first-party special needs trust. That's still going to come to the beneficiary in the way that it is currently. So what were birthday gifts or holiday gifts? We'll work with them to say, hey, are there other personal expenses of yours that we are not currently paying for that we could take on for the next couple of months or even indefinitely, so that you have more of your Social Security funds or your wages to be able to pay for those gifts for others? That's perfectly fine. So a more concrete example of this is, let's say we have a beneficiary who's currently paying for their own phone bill. But they could use the funds that would go towards the phone bill to pay for gifts for others. So they let their trust know that they want the trust to pay for the phone bill, and that allows them to save a little bit more for those gifts in the future. It can also be very important to know how a trust can be used for an individual who is receiving supplemental security income or SSI benefits. So an individual who is receiving SSI might want to know if their trust can pay for their basic food and shelter costs. And initially, a trust could be hesitant to pay for those things. That's because someone's SSI payment, and Social Security says that an SSI payment should go towards those food and shelter costs. And they define that as a rent or mortgage payment, property taxes, basic utilities like water, gas, and electric, and food. If a special needs trust were to pay for those food and shelter costs for someone who is receiving SSI benefits, it could cause what's called an in-kind support reduction, and it could reduce the amount of SSI that individual is receiving by up to 1/3. So, in 2023, the maximum monthly SSI payment is $914 per month. An SSI reduction of the maximum of 1/3 could mean that the individual is then receiving about $609 from SSI instead of the $914. Now, I said the word hesitant very specifically because there could be trust beneficiaries who, due to the amount that might be in their special needs trust, the benefit of the trust paying for those food and shelter costs might outweigh the in-kind support reduction. And if that's the case for that trust beneficiary, that is a conversation that the beneficiary and the trustee could have to determine if that is the case and if the trustee and the beneficiary would want to move forward with that kind of food or shelter payment for someone who has SSI. And it's important to know that this in-kind support reduction does not happen for an individual who's receiving other Social Security benefits like SSDI or Social Security retirement. This is only in the instance in which someone is receiving SSI. It's also important to know that if someone is receiving Medicaid benefits, a trust and SSI benefits, a trust is not able to provide direct funds to the trust beneficiary. So very specifically, what I mean is a trustee would not be able to write a check to the beneficiary that the beneficiary could then go cash. And the beneficiary would not be able to go to an ATM or go to a bank to withdraw funds from their trust. If they were to do that, SSI and Medicaid could view that direct payment as income, and it can impact their benefit eligibility. What happens at the termination of the account? And this is a gentle way of saying, what happens to remaining funds in a special needs trust when a beneficiary passes away? So two different things happen depending on the type of trust that you have. In a third-party special needs trust, the donor or donors who established that trust, at the time of establishing it, they will have named who or which organizations or religious institutions should receive any remaining funds upon the passing of the beneficiary. So in a third-party special needs trust, the donors retain 100% say on where any remaining funds should go to, and they identify who those individuals should be at the time of establishing the trust. In the world of a first-party special needs trust, there is something different that happens, and it's sometimes commonly referred to as Medicaid estate recovery or Medicaid payback. And what that means is that upon the death of the trust beneficiary, the state organizations in which the beneficiary lived can file a claim to attempt to be reimbursed for the cost of care or the cost of health coverage that state paid out to that individual over the course of their lifetime from the establishment date of the trust. And it's important to note that Medicaid is only able to go back from the establishment date of the trust, not over the entirety of the lifetime of the trust beneficiary. So for parents or loved ones who are considering establishing a trust, or if they currently have a loved one listed directly as a part of their will or estate, I do really heavily suggest that if that is happening, or if you're considering setting up a special needs trust, a third-party special needs trust might be something that you want to look at if you do have other loved ones or other individuals in your life who you might want to see those remaining funds go to. If it is in a first-party special needs trust, they are subject to that estate recovery. So those are the ins and outs of the two different types of special needs trusts. And now we're going to be talking about how they can be set up. So a third party and a first party trust can be set up through a nonprofit organization. And these organizations have what are called pooled special needs trusts. You could also set up a third party trust or first party trust through the aid of an attorney or a bank. And this would be called setting up a private special needs trust. So a pooled special needs trust is always administered by a nonprofit organization. That is one of the legal requirements for a pooled special needs trust to exist. A nonprofit organization does need to administer it. What is happening in a pooled trust organization or a pooled special needs trust is that all of the funds from all of the trusts are pooled together for the purposes of investment or financial management. So each beneficiary that has a pooled special needs trust has their own unique trust sub account where their funds and their investments are able to be tracked separately and monitored separately and uniquely. But from the eyes of the bank, all of the sub accounts are put into one bank account for the purposes of investment. The potential benefit of this is that the trust beneficiaries, by having all of those financial assets pooled, can see, or hopefully can see, a larger return on investment for their trust than necessarily having it be managed or invested as an individual. For the ARC Master Trust, we are a pooled trust organization, so all of our beneficiaries do follow the same pooled investment strategy that we have. And over the last 10 years, our annual return on investment for our beneficiaries has been about 7%. So all of those market gains, interest, dividends do go back to the beneficiaries' trusts. Pooled special needs trusts are also incredibly knowledgeable in how a special needs trust can be administered, how they can be used without impacting someone's government benefits. And this can be an option for individuals or families who, want the benefit of having the trust administered by an expert if they do not have someone in their lives who they would feel confident in being the trustee for that. In a pooled special needs trust, individuals of all ages are eligible. So there is no age restriction or eligibility requirement to establish a pooled special needs trust. It's also important to know that most pooled special needs trust organizations are only able to manage cash assets. So if there are other assets that you might be considering putting into a trust, it would be important to let that pooled trust organization that you're talking with know, because they might not be able to administer that asset. A private special needs trust can be established with the aid of an attorney. What you're doing specifically is you or the beneficiary or you as the donor are working with the attorney to draft the specific and unique trust language for your trust. So you might be able to include very specific things or very personalized things related to you or your loved one, and the attorney can help assist you with that. Private special needs trusts can be administered by a bank or other financial institution, an attorney, or any family member or friend. You can also have multiple of these individuals administer a trust, and that would be called a situation in which you have a co-trustees. So it could be two family members or an attorney alongside a family member or friend. That is absolutely possible. The trustee themselves, depending on the assets that are in that unique private special needs trust, can have a greater control of the investment strategy for the benefit of that beneficiary. So the trustee is going to be that person who is, really could have that unique say or that unique hand on how those investments work in that private trust. In Indiana, it's very important to know that first-party private special needs trusts can only be established if the beneficiary is currently under the age of 65. If an individual has an existing first-party private special needs trust, and then they reach past age 65, that beneficiary can no longer contribute to that private special needs trust. So that's one of the major differences between private and pooled. Pooled does not have an age restriction. In the private special needs trust world, for a first party private special needs trust, the beneficiary has to be under the age of 65 when it is established, and they can no longer make additional contributions once they are over the age of 65. One additional option to consider, and this is something that attorneys, I think nowadays are familiar with and do recommend to families from time to time. And this is called what is establishing a tandem trust. So this is the combination of having both a private special needs trust and a pooled special needs trust for a beneficiary. And we're talking about a private trust and a pooled trust of the same type. So a private third-party trust and a pooled third-party trust. The benefit of this is, and the idea behind this is, the majority of the financial assets or the majority of the assets for the beneficiary are held in that private special needs trust. That allows more flexibility of what types of assets can be put in that trust. And it also gives the trustee the flexibility to be very tailored and specific to what their investment strategy is going to look like. So let's say you have that trustee who is willing to be that trustee, who is very financially savvy, who the family or the individual trusts to make those investment strategies or those investment choices. But that trustee isn't as secure or isn't as sure about the day-to-day administration of the trust. So the record keeping, the disbursements, making sure that the funds are being used for the beneficiary's benefit. Well, that's where the pooled special needs trust can come in. So this is a situation in which you have the trustee of the private special needs trust funding the pooled special needs trust with the assets that are held in the private trust. And in that, you're sort of getting the best of both worlds. You're getting that unique investment strategy that is tailored to you or your loved one, while also ensuring that the funds that are being dispersed for that person's benefit or your benefit aren't being used in a way that could upset your benefit eligibility because you have that expertise of the pooled special needs trust. So that is an option that I think is really giving someone the best of both worlds or the best of both options if that is something that works for your unique situation. And there are absolutely benefits to having multiple types of special needs trusts. It truly does depend on, your unique situation or the unique situation of your loved one. And the things that you would really want to consider, when you're thinking about what special needs trust might work best for you or your loved one, or what types of special needs trusts might be best for your situation. You've got to think about the investment strategy and the assets. Are you wanting to leave a home in a special needs trust, or do you want a bit more of a say on how the trust is being invested? Where is the source of the funding coming from? Is it third-party assets or first-party assets? How much do you think is going to be going into the account? Are there secondary beneficiaries to consider? And what kind of benefits is the beneficiary currently receiving? So these are all things that you would want to consider as you sort of explore or go down the path and find the things that might work best for you. And lastly, it's really important, and I love sharing this aspect of it. So the ARC Master Trust is an option for pooled special needs trust administration, but we are also here as a resource. So we want to be able to educate and inform individuals about the options that they have, about things that they should be considering, so that they make the decision based on the information that they have. We really want to ensure that, especially when thinking about the financial world and thinking about financial trusts and special needs trusts, that the family and the beneficiary are making an informed decision And that's what we want to champion and support as well. So anyone is always welcome to reach out to us. We're happy to talk to you. So we do have more information available on our website. You're also welcome to reach out to us via phone or email. Join us on social media. We also do a monthly webinar series where we talk about the different aspects of saving for the future, how that can impact different government benefits, and different savings options that families or individuals might not have heard of or have considered. So we do also record all of those. So if you want to take a look at our backlog, you're welcome to visit our website as well. So that is everything. So I know that might have been a lot. So thank you so much for joining me on that. I am now welcome to open it up to anyone who might have any questions.